Hello and welcome to Melomaniax, the podcast where we take unbiased deep dives into the biggest musicians and bands of all time. I'm Ashton.
And I'm Dallas. Today we are going to be talking about a band that lit up the radio in the late 90s, and that is Third Eye Blind. But first, before we get into that, please don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube, or if you're into the social thing, follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And most importantly, if you could drop us a 5-star review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I almost said Apple Podcasts.
Oh,
That's not a thing.
that's a dinosaur. I'm just kidding.
The Potosaurus Rex.
Yeah.
So, if you could leave those reviews, we really appreciate that. It helps us grow the show. Although we appreciate those reviews on any platform. Those are just the main two. We also have a Patreon. There's one single $5 per month tier that's going to give you access to our private Discord, as well as a shout out on one of our episodes and the ability to vote on future episode topics like the one we're about to get into today. So, Third Eye Blind, what are your... before we get into the deep dive, we like to kind of do some first impressions, history with the artists we talk about, if there's any, things like that. So I'll let you go first, Ash. I'll throw it to you. What does Third Eye Blind mean to you, and how did you come to know them, and et cetera?
This was another one of those big childhood bands, right along with Sugar Ray, kind of same like time period. Essentially, I know a couple of their songs were on the Now CDs, and I just heard them all over the radio. And so I mean, this one is no spoilers for our ratings, but this one's a big nostalgia one for me. I still have a lot of their songs on some of my playlists. I like drumming to their stuff, good drumming stuff for their first couple albums. So I was excited for this one, and then learned a lot because I didn't really know a lot about the band. I just knew they had some early success, and that's a lot of the stuff I was familiar with. So it was a fun one to put together, and we're gonna learn a lot. There's gonna be a lot of lessons for musicians out there on what to do and what not to do when running a band. So it's gonna be a good episode.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I kind of echo all of your sentiments there. Huge nostalgia band. For me, they were the sound of like summers as a kid. Driving to the pool, the car's so hot, the seatbelt burns you, but it's all right because you're in your bathing suit. You'll be at the pool in like 5 minutes. And then, as soon as you start up the car, the radio is automatically on by default, and it's Third Eye Blind playing. So that's kind of the memories I have. Still, when I hear the first chords of Never Let You Go, that gets me. Love that. And then Semi-Charm Life as well. And then Jumper, I have a lot of history with that song. We used to do covers of that song, and we changed all the words to be about Star Wars, and we played that for an open mic night one time when I was a kid in early high school. And
Really?
so just a lot of, it was, I can't remember, my friend Jaime wrote it, but we played it and spoofed it and all that stuff. So we had a lot of fun with that song. It's just, I don't think I go super deep with this band, but all the hits mean a lot to me for sure. And then I also listened to a guitar-centric podcast, and they had the guitarist for this band on, one of them at least. And that's where I learned that he specializes in weird, very weird tunings. Like, he's not a shredder, he's not like a lead guy, but he writes and utilizes weird tunings. And I don't mean like open G or Dadgad or any of the kind of normal ones. This guy literally just like tunes the guitar however he wants, like just crazy stuff you've never heard of, and then writes songs and makes it work in a really cool way. So I thought that was pretty fascinating, and that stuck with me.
It's funny you say that.
He's such a unique guitarist in that way.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I was listening to an interview with the singer that he did recently, and he was talking about his early workings with that guitar player, and like he remembers one time they like wrapped condoms around the guitar and put it underwater and played it like underwater and recorded that sound and stuff like that. Like he said the guy was just like just one of those like sound geniuses. So it's
crazy.
It's
and
right along with
I'm
just
blanking on his name, but when it comes up in the episode, I'll be like, that's the guy.
Yeah, because there's
sure. I'll remember it when I see it, but I don't remember it right now.
There is a bit of a revolving door with musicians in this band, so you'll have to make sure you call it out when that guitar player is mentioned.
Yeah, for sure. So let's dive in. We get started.
Sweet.
Way back in the beginning.
Yeah, man. So our story today starts with the front band of the band, Steven, even though it definitely spelled Stefan, but it is Steven. Steven Jenkins, back in the early 1990s in San Francisco. And he was in the middle of struggles to keep a band together, just kind of endless rotation of different people. And he actually ended up being in a short-lived rap duo called Puck and Natty. The other half of the duo was Detroit rapper Herman Anthony Chun, and the duo actually managed to attract some attention from some record labels, and they got one of their songs, "Just Want to Be Your Friend," on the soundtrack of the TV show Beverly Hills 90210. So that's pretty cool. And this led to the duo almost signing with Capitol Records, but Steven didn't like where the label's direction had them, going, and so the deal fell through, and then the duo fell apart. But some good came of this. He made some connections with the record industry. He also wrote a song in this group that would later be a huge hit for his future band, Third Eye Blind, and that would be Semi Charmed Life. So the early writings of that song were put together during this group.
Yeah. So Steven put together Third Eye Blind in 1993. That's the year you were born.
It was. So
Or just as old as you are.
True.
So following the rap duo, he wanted to go back to making rock bands and rock music. So the earliest form of the band was Steven and guitar player Jason Slater writing songs together and struggling to keep band members around them. I think this is a theme we're going to see throughout this whole episode.
Yeah, dude.
They must have been scraping the bottom of the barrel for band members because they said they were losing members to drug addiction and leaving to go to other bands. And honestly, not a good sign. And if you're someone that can't keep a band together, if you can't keep one together, a couple guys leave, that's fine. But if you're rotating full bands every few months or years, then it's you. And that's like one of the biggest red flags that I've seen in my own life playing with bands and dealt with myself when I join a band because they're rotating bands again. And then you realize like, oh yeah, it's this guy. He's the problem. Like no wonder you can't keep a band together,
Yeah.
So
it's always quick to identify the problem. You're like in there,
Yep.
You're like, oh, yep, I see it. It is it's plain as day for everyone other than that person.
Right. He's just like, wow, everyone sucks but me.
Yeah,
And it's
everyone's
like, hold on.
awful. Wait a second. So anyway,
Yeah,
Steven
that's
and Jason ended up putting together a demo. And because of Steven's previous connections through Puck and Natty, he was able to set up some recordings with sound engineer David Gleason. And they actually got to go record some of their demos. And one of the places they recorded some of the music was at Skywalker Ranch, which I thought was pretty cool. That'd be a cool place
that's always
to
been a
visit.
dream of mine to work there.
Yeah.
Like to do some work there, rather.
Yeah, I wonder what it costs to do.
I don't think there's a price. It's probably like an invitation only kind of thing.
I see.
I don't think they just have a price. Yeah.
You got to get the right connections there.
And then you still have to pay an astronomical fee, probably.
Yeah, for sure.
But you got to get invited first.
Yeah, so things ended up falling through with David and Steven, and a lot of the work was scrapped. But Steven did continue to perfect that a few songs they were working on, like Semi Charmed Life and All Right Caroline. So some of the stuff they were working on still remained, continued to evolve.
Yep, and now it's time to start adding some more band members. So a little bit after those demo recordings, Jason left the band and was replaced by Kevin Cadigan on guitar. That is the guy who I was talking about.
That's what I figured.
The odd tunings and stuff. And they also brought on bass player Arian Salazar. That's an amazing bass player name. That's a 10 out of 10 bass player name. Honestly, anything Salazar, John Salazar, it doesn't matter. It's just perfect.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And then of course they cycled through a few different drummers, including Adrian Burley, Steve Bowman from Counting Crows, and Michael Urbano from Smash Mouth. So a bond started to form between Kevin and Steven in particular, and the two became the primary songwriting duo. So that's where a lot of that Third Eye Blind sound comes from. And that's Kevin with all those alternate tunings and stuff. So
yep,
a lot of that sound is kind of the uniqueness of his guitar playing.
I have to agree. Yeah, those two are really like the core for what most people, know of Third Eye Blind, those main songs. So this lineup toured locally through 94 and 95 to start building up a following, or to build up a following. And all was going well until in 1995, they participated in a Battle of the Bands, and the winner of the Battle of the Bands would win a record deal. And so, in classic Battle of the Bands fashion, the drummer at the time was Michael Urbano for Smash Mouth, and he quit the band right before the show. Then Steven was sick.
Been there.
Yep, I know. Steven was sick and unable to perform well, and then Kevin blew out his amp 2 songs into the show. So they obviously lost. And with that loss, they took a hit to their confidence, and they also lost the confidence of their management team.
Yeah, that's rough. I never understand quitting right before a show. Like, no matter how bad it gets, I just can't fathom that. Because my pride, my own personal pride in like my own performance would be like, well, I'm never quitting the show. I gotta get out there. We'll do the show. We'll deal with it after. You know what I mean? I might not do the next show, but I'm doing this one. I'm here. Like, you know,
Right?
unless they tell me not to, and then it's like, I'll respect that too. But that's crazy to me that people are like that. But anyway, their management team left after the performance, and the band was on the verge of breaking up. But instead, they regrouped, added drummer Brad Hargreaves, and a new band manager, Eric Gotland. So they finally had the lineup that would record Third Eye Blind's first 2 albums. But first, it was demo time again. So using previous connections, they put together a demo with producer and sound engineer Eric Valentine, one of my favorite producers ever.
Really?
It's funny he comes up in this video because I've been studying his work for the past 2 weeks. Hours of watching his videos and learning his techniques and stuff for our own the New Bourbon Sun stuff. So it's pretty funny to see Eric Valentine. I didn't know he did this early demo. The demo attracted the interest of Arista Records, who brought the band to New York City to perform a showcase. So here's a crazy story. At the time, Third Eye Blind would normally have a piñata filled with candy released above the heads of the mosh pits at their shows. It's crazy to think there were even mosh pits at their shows. But for some reason, Steven decided to fill the piñata with live crickets for the showcase to the label executives. The show was obviously unsuccessful for that label, but the event itself gained the band a little bit of notoriety, which always helps. So that's interesting. That's not as crazy out of what it, it could have been like fake blood or something crazy,
But
crickets.
Dude,
Crickets are just kind of like a minor inconvenience. Like, stop.
dude, I mean, a lot of people don't like bugs though, and I don't want to make this association, but a bunch of corporate executives, probably in suits, getting crickets released on them would be they'd probably have the worst reaction of basically anybody I could think of. So
yeah, true.
But I think it was just I mean, that kind of thing goes like viral within like the different labels. Because could you imagine being like a rival label and you're like, oh, dude, that's hilarious when you hear that happened. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's why I kind of ended up being more of a positive for them. So following this, Steven challenged Epic Records executive Dave Massey in a meeting that ended up landing them the opening spot for Oasis. Do we know that name? Dave Massey, is that from the Gorillaz episode? I feel like
could be. Epic Records executive. Epic Records a big company. They've come in probably a lot of episodes.
I gotcha. Yeah, we've definitely discussed Dave Massey. I just can't remember from what episode. But if we're talking about Oasis, like I kind of feel like he was there with Blur.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
for sure.
So, anyways, they actually at the show they earned an encore, which is usually not very common for an opening band. And so they had a big encore, and then they ended up getting paid double by the concert promoter because of how successful their show was. So that's pretty awesome. Steven also at the time helped produce the Braids cover of Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, and that further gained them even more record label attention. So about this time, the band had found themselves in like a bidding war between a bunch of labels. So they ended up signing with Sylvia Rohn of Elektra Records because they offered the most artistic freedom. And I don't have the exact figures, but it was later reported that the contract was the biggest publishing deal for an unsigned artist at the time. So big numbers.
Nice. So even though they were finally signed, dysfunction was never far from this band. So while in the studio, Steven and Eric Valentine clashed a good bit. That's crazy, dude. If you watch Eric Valentine, he's literally the chillest human.
Yeah.
So Eric was a sound engineer, but felt like he was given the workload of a producer, but wasn't being paid producer money. Barely got a co-production credit despite the amount of work and influence he had on the album. So guitar player Kevin Cadigan had his fair share of issues with Steven as well. Don't we all, apparently? Kevin thought they were equals in the songwriting process, but quickly figured out that wasn't the case. So Valentine said Steven and Kevin wrote great material together, but were always butting heads in the studio. Additionally, right before the band signed their record deal, Steven secretly set up Third Eye Blind Inc. as a corporation, in which he was the sole owner and shareholder, giving him complete control over all legal and financial matters relating to the band. And despite all of this, the band still released their debut album, which we're going to talk about now, but as we know, was a big big success with a lot of hits. So
Yeah,
let's talk
dude.
about it.
That is so real quick. That's just so slimy of Steven to to do that. Like, because none of the band members knew at the time. And of course they'll later find out. But like to like go secretly like before your record deal, like get it signed over to a corporation that you set up
Yeah.
as.
Well,
It's just
it's
so
pretty
bad.
obvious who's the
Oh
problem.
yeah, dude.
You know,
It is blindingly obvious who's the problem in this band from the start. And
like
in the
Eric
in
Valentine is he's like an audio genius, but he's like kind of a small, slight, quiet-ish kind of guy. I just can't imagine him having problems with anybody. Like,
it was more so just the amount of workload he was that was being put on him to the paycheck size. So like they were paying him like a sound engineer and also being like, "Hey man, produce the album." Like, "All right, well pay me like a producer." And they're like, yeah, I don't know about all that, but I still need you to do all that
yeah,
work." So like that just probably
yeah.
standing up for himself like, "Dude, I'm putting out gold here. I need to be paid, respective wages." So anyways, the self-titled debut album would be released on April 8th, 1997. The album would end up going 6 times platinum and also peaked at number 25 on the Billboard 200. I think it entered at like 150 something and ended up just climbing to 25 over the course of a year. So, big success. The album had 5 singles released to promote it. The first single from the album was Semi Charmed Life, which hit number 4 on the Billboard 100. I definitely thought this was going to be a number 1 single going into this episode, but 4 is still really good. The second single was Graduate, which missed the Billboard 100, landed on some smaller charts. The third single was How's It Gonna Be, which landed at number 9 on the Billboard 100. The fourth single was Losing a Whole Year, which only managed to hit some smaller charts. And the fifth and final single was Jumper, which was able to peak at number 5 on the Billboard 100. So 3 top 10 singles on their debut album, which is a feat that puts you in quite legendary company. Now, that's not a very common thing. So I'm just shocked they were able to be that successful among their dysfunction.
Yeah, and lots of bands managed to. Guns N' Roses being a prime example, and I mean literally hundreds of others. So following that album, the band started touring extensively. So they landed some opening spots for U2 and the Rolling Stones. It's pretty big. Following those tours, they started headlining their own shows, including a tour with Smash Mouth. Nice reunion there. That had to be the most 90s show of all time. Smash Mouth and Third Eye Blind.
Dude, right? If only Sugar Ray was there too. Like, oh.
Who else would you add? Who are the big 4 of that kind of 90s softer alt rock? I think we got 3.
Got 3. We would need a 4th.
I guess it might be like Oasis or something.
Yeah, probably. Actually, at that time.
They're across the pond. But anyway, so they were still their same old dysfunctional selves during this tour, though. And having a show where Steven fell from the side of the stage, leaving him unconscious. And Arian, the bass player, missing time from having a viral infection, as well as getting into a fight with the bass player for Green Day during a show.
Is that the other 4th?
Want to fight Green Day? So I'm on their side for that. Who doesn't want to fight Green Day?
Is that the 4th? Green Day, I feel like, was bigger in the 2000s than the 90s, but I could be very wrong about that.
And they're also more like punk.
Yeah, that is true.
Where all the other bands we listed were like kind of, I don't know, soft rock. They're not like hard and
radio
fast,
rock. I don't know at the time.
Like it's kind of
soft
alternative. I don't know what else to call it. Yeah,
yacht rock of the 90s.
Yeah, 90s yacht rock.
Yeah,
what an insult to yacht rock.
I know,
to put Smash Mouth anywhere near.
Dude, well, Smash Mouth kind of started
anywhere
off
near
as like
Steely Dan.
Yeah, I know, right? Dude, Smash Mouth was kind of like a punk sounding band for their early stuff, like ska punk sounding, and then they really came into their own after a couple albums. But
dang, what a few hits they had. But that's a story for another day.
Yeah, we'll get into that some other time. Despite all this, the band still managed to make it back in the studio to work on their second album. They had about 30 songs kind of to choose from for the album, and were given a deadline of like 6 months to have a full recorded album put out. So, at the time, the members said the process was easy and carefree, but later would admit to this recording session being very difficult, especially with how little time they were given. And so Steven and Kevin were still going at it with each other. Kevin finally found out about that secret corporation that Steven had created. And through all of this, the two actually managed to put their differences aside and just work on the music. And when it came down to choosing which songs would go on the album, Steven and Kevin both had individually written quite a few songs. And so, like, they each had a bunch written and they were trying to decide what goes on the album. So obviously, each of them wanted their own music to be the primary focus. So each one, like, oh, we should go with more of my songs. We should go with more of my songs, So the manager ended up just creating a voting system that was anonymous with the whole band. And after the 4-month process of deciding what to put on the album, they finally finished their second studio album.
Yeah, and Blue is what it was called. That would be released on November 23rd, 1999, right before Y2K. The album did end up being certified platinum and landed at number 40 on the Billboard 200. This album had 4 singles released to help promote it. The first was Anything, which only hit some minor charts. The second single was Never Let You Go, my favorite, which landed at number 14 on the Billboard 100. I would have liked to have seen that a little higher. I love that song. The third single was 10 Days Late, which also only hit some minor charts. And the fourth and final single was Deep Inside of You, which, in the most ironic turn of events ever, hit number 69 on the Billboard 100.
I can't believe that.
I mean, you can't plan that any better, So it seems like actually both of their albums, they had, 4 or 5 singles each. And then it was like hit, bust, hit, bust, hit every time. You notice that?
Yeah, and I'd be curious to see like who wrote which songs. I'd have to go back and look at the writing credit.
But then it's also like, I don't know how well the credits were done. It could have been like...
Yeah, it sounds like the credits...
You'd have to sit them down and ask. And probably not Steven. You'd have to ask someone else.
Yeah, you need to ask one of the members that was not either of those two. Like,
or honestly. The producers is where you usually get the most honest answers.
Yeah, that's true. They would also be pretty...
Because they don't really have a dog in the fight. They're just kind of like, yeah, that was a shit show.
Yeah, it sounds like... well, if you thought that was a shit show, let's... our story only goes down from here, unfortunately. But
all right.
It's all right, let's go. Lots of lessons to be learned, So anyways, 2 months after the album's release, Kevin would be fired from the band with no reason listed for termination. But I feel like we saw this coming just due to the constant feuding between him and Steven. And since Steven had full control of the band because of the corporation he put together, any disagreements could just be settled by him firing the person or kicking them out of the band without, any voting needing to be any voting. So Kevin was replaced by Tony Fridinelli, who had previously auditioned for the band back in 93. And the new lineup toured like crazy and supported their second album. And during the tour, that's trying to mix Kevin and tour, dude. Just trying to be real efficient, mix my words. During the tour,
just make the whole script one word.
One word. Yeah, it's just a multi-syllable word. Yeah.
Belogamanet, and thank you so much.
Hope you got that.
See you guys next week. Why is this podcast 7 seconds long? It's just all sped up.
Yeah, dude. So, as you could probably guess, Kevin started a lawsuit against Steven for wrongful termination and that he wasn't receiving any royalties after being fired. And what's a music biography without a lawsuit? Is it really even music then? So
just one?
Oh no, there's plenty more. Don't you worry.
So the band continued to write music and tour for about 4 years before they finally released more material. So during this time, they originally planned to release an EP called Black. I guess that kind of follows the Blue thing. That would have been the partner to it, but it would ultimately fall through due to Steven going through a year of depression. So during the time he took away from the band, he still continued to write songs, compiling about 40 new ones, and their lawsuit with Kevin would be settled outside of court during this time. I'd be interested to hear what that settlement was. The band also built their own recording studio in San Francisco called Morningwood Studios. That's a great name.
Right. So on May 13th, 2003, 4 years after the release of their second album, they finally released their third studio album, Out of the Vein. The album debuted at number 12 on the Billboard 200 and only managed to sell about 500,000 copies to date. So not nearly as successful as the previous two. The album had 2 singles around this time. The first was Blinded, parentheses, When I See You, which only hit the bubbling under Hot 100 at number 16. And I actually do like that song. I feel like when I was listening through the discography, I feel like I had heard it before, but maybe like once. That one's not bad. And then the second single was Crystal Baller, which didn't manage to land on any charts. And part of the reason the album lacked the success was the month of they were going to release their record. Elektra Records was absorbed by Atlantic Records, so their label basically just ceased to exist right upon the release. So they had no label support for the release of the album, no promotion, nothing like that. And they would later be cut from Atlantic Records about a year later.
Yeah, so slow times were ahead for Third Eye Blind after the label imploded. Steven originally planned to work on some solo material, but after hearing some of the music that the other band members had been working on, he decided to help them put together a fourth album. So they began working on their fourth album in 2005, but Steven was suffering from writer's block and things were pretty stagnant. So during this slump is when bass player Arian left the band. He wasn't directly replaced with any one guy. They had two different bass players cover his live performances and had a rotating door of bass players step in for studio work. That's not the most uncommon thing. The band originally planned to release their album in 2007, but due to Steven constantly changing lyrics, they had to re-record a lot, which delayed the release of their album. Additionally, of course, more internal struggles arose, so the band's morale was at an all-time low with the departure of Arian. So Steven's just steadily... I mean, I know Arian left, but Steven's basically just steadily getting rid of everybody, until he's the last one standing.
Yep.
Also, Steven started getting into it with their manager, of course, Eric Gottland, and Steven fired him and sued him because he said Eric wasn't paying him enough, and in turn, Eric countersued. This is a mess. He said the lower pay was because of the dip in production from the band, and Steven's case would be dismissed, and Eric settled his case out of court. Yeah, your case being dismissed is the judge essentially being like, dude, what are you doing?
Yeah, so basically... Steven was getting paid less, and Eric was like, well, you're taking forever to write music, during his writer's block. Yeah, exactly. He's like, you're not doing anything, so why would you keep getting paid at that same rate? Steven's it's hard to like this guy. I'm just going to be straight up about it, I will say, and I was telling you before this, all musicians out there, if you ever, get the opportunity to play in Third Eye Blind, just run away. Just absolutely run away. Do not do it. It is not where you want to be. It's only going to result in you being in a lawsuit with Steven. That's it. That's the only outcome.
Gave me the funniest image in my head of hey, what's up? I'm Steven. We really need a bass player. Could you come in and where are you going? Just sprinting as hard as you can the other direction. What'd I say?
Yeah. No.
Come back. Okay. All right. He's gone. Okay.
Yeah. Exactly what I say.
Turns to the next guy. How about you? Sprints away as well. Damn it.
He's gone. Yeah. So despite all of this, the band pushed forward with their fourth studio album, and they had enough material recorded to release about 2 albums. I think they had 30, 35 recorded songs or somewhere in there, and which they thought about doing a double album release within the year, but that ended up kind of falling through. And so they released their fourth album, Ursa Major, on August 18th, 2009, under their own label, Mega Collider Records, and Collider. Sorry,
I feel it.
Reading it like a last name would be. You know what I'm saying? So Ursa Major debuted at number 3 on the Billboard 200, their highest Billboard 200.
Nice.
The sales, however, were
that's surprising.
Very lackluster. They dropped about 77% after the initial week. The album had 3 singles that didn't hit any charts, and those were Don't Believe a Word, Non-Dairy Creamer, and Bonfire.
Very cool. So the band went on tour to support their new album after that, and during their tour, guitar player Tony Fridanelli was fired from the band. He was replaced by Chris Reed, and the band still flirted with the idea of releasing a second album called Ursa Minor, but they decided to just focus on touring instead. So Tony ended up suing Steven for $8 million based on claims of breach of contract and missing wages from royalties and writing credits. Based on the contract that Tony signed, his claims weren't supported, but he did still end up winning almost $500,000 from that lawsuit. That's an interesting thing, because and it kind of reminds me of the Taylor Swift thing. It's like sometimes some lawsuits come apart that basically could be boiled down to dude, that wasn't cool. And the judges have to be like, well,
you signed a contract.
Maybe it was cool, maybe it wasn't, but it's not illegal.
Yeah.
So I don't know what you're doing here. You have no ground. You signed it. You read it, presumably. You signed it, and now you're saying you want to go back on that, and I can't help you with that. So
yeah. So essentially,
the lesson there is just be careful what you sign. Really read it. Get professional help to read it, because they try to shadow and hide so many things in there. It's meant to be confusing, so you want to make sure you're getting proper help and really take your time with it. We've signed contracts, and we took weeks to go over every line together, individually, as a group, with lawyers, everything. And that's what you want to do. And anything you don't like, make sure you get it out of there, or try at least, or just don't sign it. You don't have to do it.
Yeah. So the way I look at that is $7.5 million was covered, by the contract that he signed. You know what I mean? So like he was shorted some wages, but only, like you said, about that $500,000 could end up being proven of being shorted. But the rest was just him signing a bad contract, which probably, I don't know how it worked exactly with how Steven set up the corporation. I don't know if that then is like, I don't know how he pays out the other guys or how that works, but
no way to know.
Yeah,
the only way to know would be to look at those contracts.
It just
yourself.
Sounds so messy. So that's all I know.
It's pretty telling that people, every single person essentially has gotten fired and then immediately sued. So it's like, yeah, not great.
Yeah.
But even if it's not illegal, you could still, like, one thing that's hard for some people to understand, I think, is it's not illegal to be mean or be a dick or take advantage of people. Like, unless you cross a legal line, just being mean and not nice is not illegal. So, unfortunately, but
I get that.
We always want to be the coolest, best people we can be, going forward, and hopefully we bring that energy to us. But
it does sound like
that's a tough lesson to learn, I think.
Yeah, it does sound like there was an issue with him not giving writing credit to people and him taking their writing credit.
I'm sure there were tons of issues. Yeah, this is not me defending Steven, because I don't know any of the details.
I know, you're just saying, like, you're just laying out the facts, honestly, just facts of the matter.
Yeah, whatever we do know, which the only way you could know is you'd have to look at those contracts yourself. I wouldn't even trust talking to anyone involved because the biases would be so strong. But
for sure.
You'd have to get your hands on that paper and go over it and stuff, which I don't want to do. I got other stuff to do.
Yeah, exactly. So the band ended up hiring, they finally hired a full-time bass player after this, and they brought bass player Alex LeCavalier, and they also brought on Alex Kopp, Kopp, probably just Kopp, as a full-time keyboardist. And he had done some live work with them previously, so he was just finally brought on as a full-time member. And so this is, they finally just made the jump from 4 members to 5. And the band continued to write music for a 5th album, and Steven continued to suffer from writer's block, so that's fun. And their 5th album wouldn't end up being released until June 16th, 2015, and that would be Dopamine, and that debuted at number 13 on the Billboard 200, and the album came along with 2 singles and a cover of Beyonce's song Mine. The 2 singles were Everything Is Easy and Get Me Out of Here, and neither one managed to hit the charts.
So following this album, the band kind of got out of their slump and started being a little bit more productive. So they planned the release of an EP for 2016, as well as planning a benefit concert for Musicians on Call, which is a charity organization in close proximity to the Republican National Convention. So they used the stage to speak against the Republican Party and gain some national coverage from their outburst. This inspired the band to continue with new material, and they released their EP, We Are Drugs, on October 7th, 2016. The EP spawned 1 single, Cop vs. Phone Girl, which did not manage to chart, and the band released another EP in 2018 called Thanks for Everything, which was just all cover songs. So doing the cover songs actually inspired the band to put together their 6th studio album, and before the release of their 6th album, their keyboard player left the band and was replaced by Colin Creve.
Amazingly, no lawsuit with that guy leaving.
Yeah, he's like, I'm just a keyboardist, whatever.
Yeah, it's not worth my time. So on October 18th, 2019, they released their 6th studio album, Screamer, and it did not chart on the Billboard 200, and there was nothing with sales listed. But once again, this is now like the modern music era, so sales aren't really a thing. It's more streams and downloads. The album had 3 singles released that didn't hit any charts, and they were Screamer, Walk Like Kings, and The Kids Are Coming, parentheses, To Take You Down. And the band went on tour after the album, but that was short-lived due to COVID. So the band instead started doing live streams and just performing online.
Interesting. Yeah, during COVID, the band worked on another studio album. This will be their 7th, and it was called Our Band Apart. And that was released on September 24th, 2021. I remember this one coming out. This album also didn't hit the Billboard 200 and had 3 singles. None of them charted. Those singles were Box of Bones, Again, and To the Sea. So they took to touring after the album and also released an acoustic album during that time called Unplugged in June of 22. As of late, Third Eye Blind was on tour with Yellowcard from June to August this year. That would have been fun.
Right.
And it's been announced that the band is working on an 8th album. So until then, I guess we'll wait and see. And that brings us up to today and also to our ratings. But before we get into those ratings, any final thoughts or discussion on Third Eye Blind and after we've done the deep dive?
Yeah, you said that show would have been good, and I agree. Whereas, when we did Sugar Ray, that guy was never too much of a great singer to begin with, but it has really fallen off now. I will say Steven's vocals sound exactly the same as they did in the 90s, like to this day.
Wow.
Like
That's awesome.
Yeah, you listen to that album and like he just has the exact same sound. Like it has not changed at all. So I bet when they, do
So
the
he's still doing it. That's
classics,
good.
yeah, when they do the classics, like it's still probably a really good show and, it sounds great. So I bet that tour actually was like pretty awesome.
And Yellowcard, I know their one song. I don't know that I know too much else.
I've always wanted to dive into them just because I know we love the song Ocean Avenue. That they have another song that I thought we knew.
That was a top song.
I just can't remember.
Yeah, there was another one. I can't remember what it is.
It was another radio hit that they had. But I bet there's some good stuff there if we were to go back and,
I'm sure. Yeah, if it sounds like Ocean Avenue, it's going to be great. Kind of that poppy kind of stuff. So getting into the ratings, the way we do it at Melomaniax is we break our ratings down. We used to just throw a number out there, but we were like, well, we need to break it down a little bit more. So we break it into 6 categories. We score each of those out of 5, and then we take the average at the end for the final rating. Those 6 categories are creativity, evolution, replayability, cultural impact, emotional connection, and nostalgia factor. So, Ashton, why don't you get us started with creativity? Third Eye Blind, creativity out of 5.
Gosh,
this is defined as creativity within their genre. So, if they are a rock band, are they the same as every other rock band? Are they different? Did they start something? Things like that. So,
man, I think it's hard. I'm like between a 3 and a 4, leaning 4, because the initial like creation of this band was to take rock like the instrumental to be rock and then kind of fit like hip hop feeling lyrics, and you kind of get that vibe with how fast the lyrics are, how they flow through the song. It's not your typical like rock vocals, and they do have some screaming and stuff implemented, like or a little more hardcore stuff, but just like the format of their vocals and lyrics is hip hop based, and you can kind of get that feel. And also within just the, like you were talking about, the guitar player himself also gives them like a couple points of creativity alone.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm at like a 4 out of 5, just because their early sound was
talking
unique.
You're talking about them recording underwater and stuff, like that's worth something.
Yeah, so I'm at a 4 out of 5.
So that brings us to evolution. Where did they start and where did they end? And was that a positive change, a negative change, etc.? Or did they not change at all? I always use AC/DC as a reference. That band would get probably a 5 on creativity and a 1 on evolution. And that's not saying they're bad. That's just part of their thing. So evolution for this band, what you thinking?
I'm at like a 1 or a 2. They really didn't change a whole lot other than, if anything, I feel like they degraded over time due to the members leaving, and those members were
what I was thinking,
an important part of their sound. I'm just like 1 or 2. How harsh should I be? Like they technically evolved, but it wasn't in the right way, if that makes sense. So like I'll give them a 2. I'll be a little friendly,
I was the same way, between a 1 and a 2, and we're gonna make up for it here though. Replayability, I think for me that's getting between a 4 and a 5. I'm gonna go 5. There's never a bad time to put on a Third Eye Blind song, and if it's one of their big hits, to me at least, it's just perfect. That brings us to cultural impact out of 5. How did they impact the culture? This is somewhat objective. I think I'm feeling like it's kind of right in the middle, maybe a 3.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with 2 on cultural impact. I mean,
I'll match you there.
Yeah, they weren't, the biggest like impact with like and kind of part of cultural impact is like a little bit of it is like Billboard charting and things like that. Like how famous did they get? How much did they affect, the scene around them? And I don't think they had a ton of impact, but they definitely like had a little bit. So they're not a 1, but I'm gonna put them at a 2.
That brings us to emotional connection. So this is a very personal one, and that's really, I think, summed up by how do you connect to, I guess, particularly the lyric content or the music in general.
Hmm.
I think for me, this might be a 3. I mean, I know they sing a lot about drugs and stuff. I'm not a drug user, so I don't relate to that. But there's still just something about it that I connect with. I think it might be more the melodies and the things like that.
Believe it or not, I actually don't think that they themselves were big into drugs. And I know that sounds
well,
weird.
The famous story, and I don't know how true it is, but is that "Never Let You Go" is about crystal meth.
Yeah. A lot of their stuff is about drugs, but it sounds like more so like the music scene around them. And I know Steven talked about his mom being an alcoholic, and I don't know how much with drugs, but like that kind of addiction thing that he grew up seeing in his parents. So yeah. So I think a lot of that is like from a, observing that kind of drug behavior, if that makes sense. I'm gonna go a 4 out of 5 for emotional connection. I like a lot of the, believe it or not, I actually like a lot of the songs, and feel some of the stuff they talk about with their like.
And I went with a 3 out of 5, and then nostalgia factor is the last one. That's for me, obviously a 5 out of 5. That brings my total to a solid 3.5 out of 5.
Yep, I'm gonna be at a 5 out of 5 for nostalgia as well. This is
And
one
Ashton
of
is
the
at
biggest
a
bands.
3.6 repeating, so we'll say a 3.7.
Isn't it
out of 5
crazy
there
how
for
they're
Ashton.
how heavily influenced their scores are just from how good their first 2 albums were? Because they
Yeah, I mean, hey, that's a good thing if you put out an amazing, groundbreaking first album or two, like,
no one can take
and
that
then you
away
don't
from
do it
you.
again. Like, well, hey, you did it. Like,
Yeah,
you won.
no one can take that away from you if you have like
No
a
one
really
said you
good
had to do it
album.
15 times. Yeah, you did it once. That's enough.
Yeah, so 3.7 to 3.5, pretty high scores actually. But of course, I kind of had that feeling
That
just
is pretty high
because
scores. Yeah.
those nostalgia
Now, if we were
factors.
scoring it based on personal relationships or attitudes, it might be a little bit lower. But
For sure, if there was a separate rating for like, how professional was this band, like
it's
how
just
much did
called
they get along?
dickness.
Yeah, dickness.
7 out of 5.
7 out of 5 for sure.
No, and you know what? I do withhold judgment because I don't like passing judgment. Something I try really hard to do is I don't judge anyone based on what someone else tells me. If you think so and so is a dick, and you tell me like, God, I hate that guy. He's such a dick. Like, I respect that you feel that way, but I don't hate that guy until he's a dick to me, or until he does something that like, I'm not going to take someone else's word for how I should feel about something. You know what I mean? So I'll go find for myself. And maybe he is. Now, obviously, if he murders someone, not talking about Steven, talking about random person X that we made up. That's enough. Like, I don't need to, like, well, he didn't murder me. Like, it's not like that. Like, but if he's just like, he was rude to me once, stuff like that. It's kind of like, well, I don't know. He's been fine with me. I hadn't done anything weird to me. I'm not going to hate him for you. So there's a little bit of that here. I haven't met Stephen Jenkins. I don't have a bad word to say about him. I've read all of this now, and we know his history, and that's probably worth something. But never met the guy, never did anything wrong to me, and he wrote some great music. So we'll withhold a little bit of judgment there. It's too easy to judge people nowadays. I see it so often. I see it in sports. I see it in music mostly. Where someone does something and everyone's like, "Fuck this guy." It's like, you don't know that guy. Come on. Yeah, and honestly, if you were in his shoes, you probably would have done the same thing, or maybe worse, which is, says a lot, I think. It's just, you can't prove that, so it's kind of annoying, but it is what it is. Rant over.
Rant over. Some valid points. Well, that does it today for Third Eye Blind, another one of those famous 90s bands that we remember on the radio. It was a good one, fun one, and
yeah. And another one of those bands that everybody knows their songs, even if they don't know the band. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Those bands are like Foreigner is a big one, Sugar Ray, and there's, lots of others. But I feel like Def Leppard actually might even be one too. Although I know Def Leppard songs at this point, I feel like that you could make that argument as well.
Yeah, Def Leppard might be more age-based. I feel like if you were
true.
like listening to music through the 80s, like you know who Def Leppard was, but like maybe people our age where we're like fringe, like maybe you heard it, maybe you didn't, you still know some of their songs regardless
We
of
gotta do
what
Def
you
Leppard
think.
soon.
Yeah, that sounds like a great one. I know they've got a great story.
Yeah, and just killer songs on pretty much albums all the way up through like the 2000s.
Huh. We'll add that one to the list. But
Let's add it to the list. Cool. Well, that'll do it for us today. We will see you guys next time. Make sure if you're listening on YouTube, you drop us a like and a subscribe. Follow us on those socials, Instagram and TikTok at Melomaniax Podcast. And hit us with those 5-star reviews wherever you're listening to this podcast. And consider checking out our Patreon. That's on our website. It's just melomaniax.com. Or you can go to patreon.com/melomaniax and find it there. With all that said, thank you guys so much. And we'll be back at you next week with another episode. We'll see you then.